Okay, this is a video to show you how to do projects for CS201. Projects are found under the projects link here. Currently the only set enabled is set 1. There's ultimately 11 sets altogether. So these are the 5 projects in set 1. The process for doing a project, and this the main topic of this video, is to show you sort of the steps involved. This is not just a matter of writing some code and submitting it, but rather there needs to be some back and forth with feedback from me before you submit your code. So the way, I'm going to use this as a whiteboard here, the way to do a project is, first one, attend class for the project briefing. In class, I'll discuss each of the projects, kind of highlighting the key things. Then 2 is draft code for each project. Excuse me. 3, email code to J. Keklak. Send 1 email per project. Do not send all code attached to 1 email. I'm going to call it 3A. In the subject line of each email, put just the name of the project. So, for instance, if for shopping list part 1, put shopping in the subject line. Shopping list part 1. And you might also want to name your file that you attach. So attach, for example, shopping list part 1.py to that email. There's no need to put anything in the body of the message unless you want to. So, okay. So then 4, you'll receive a feedback email from me. Okay, so the feedback can be will either be looks good, feel free to submit, which point you can submit your code, or there'll be feedback, and in which case, oops, I'm not sure what's going on there. Read the feedback carefully and make required changes. Then email your revised code. So 5, okay. Oops. So what'll happen then is you'll go back to 4, meaning you'll receive a feedback email, another feedback email from me about your revised code, and the feedback will either be looks good, feel free to submit, or there will be more feedback. what will affect ultimately whether you get full credit for a project or not is if you didn't address all the feedback from the initial email. It's not good to have a feedback email that repeats previous feedback. So be sure to carefully read all the feedback and make all the changes that are required. And it'll be to everyone's benefit because it'll minimize the amount of time that you spend on projects and the amount of time I spend reviewing code and sending back emails about your project code. Okay? So that's the process, right? Now I want to actually demonstrate two of the projects to show you how to, what I have in mind or what's expected of you, when you're doing your projects. Okay. So the first project is going to be that I'll show is the shopping list. And some of the projects are really, really simple, like this one. All right, so you start with an empty file. You always start with an empty file, unless, actually, subsequent project sets, you'll start with the existing code from a previous version of a project. So this, the initial shopping list one starts with an empty file. Part 2 will start with whatever code you create for this version. So, all right, so you can put these comments into your program. So let's, all right. So we're going to create a new file. We're going to save this as, I'm going to just save it in a Scratch directory called, and we're going to call it shopping list part 1.py. Okay, and we'll paste in those comments, some blank spaces in to make your code readable. All right, so this program, when it runs, is simply going to display these 3 lines of text. Okay. Actually, it's a one pager here, so it should be relatively easy for you to kind of gather all the information you need for creating this project. Okay, so in order to do this, we need to do a couple of things. One is we're going to create an empty list called shopping list, and then we're going to add some code to add these to the list one at a time. And then in the output part of the program, we're going to print out this list. So this is going to use code that you're familiar with for all these steps. Okay, so let's now. So we're going to create our shopping list as an empty list. And then we're going to populate our list with it's generally good to type all this stuff out if you're learning a program, because the more repetition the better. Milk, I believe eggs, and bread. I noticed that I kind of put some blank lines in here. These are what are called code paragraphs. Code paragraphs are groups of lines that perform a particular task. So this one here, the task it performs is it creates this list. Okay? These 3 lines are grouped together because they populate the list. Okay? There's no processing. Okay? And then the output is just going to display that list using the familiar for loop for item in shopping list. doing here? Print item. Okay, so this is yet another paragraph which is displaying the list. Okay, so each one of these paragraphs has a particular task. All right, and you're not done until you run your program to make sure it does what it's supposed to and that there's no typos in it. Okay, at which point you're done. So now you would take this file, attach it to an email message. In the subject line, you would put the name of the project, and you'd send it to me, and then wait for a feedback email from me, which we should get fairly shortly. Certainly, typically the same day, if not like almost immediately. Sometimes the next day. All right, your initial drafts of your projects, since we have class on Wednesday, they're due by midnight on Friday. Okay, so you have a couple of days to do them. There's not a whole lot of programming, so they're not really kind of a long and tedious task. So your first your draft should be received by midnight on Friday. Otherwise, your project is considered late. Even if you submit it on time, if the draft is late, the project is late. Okay, so let me now demonstrate how to do a somewhat more complex project. The printing multiple items on one line. Okay, so this project has three parts, A, B, and C. Okay, so this is how you should do a multi-part project. There's one other project in here that's a multi-part, which is the dot matrix printing project. Okay, so once again, start with an empty file, and we'll save that as, once again, in our Scratch. I'm saving it in the Scratch folder. You guys should save these, like, in terms of, project set 1, project set 2 folders, so you can find these later. You will need to find this code later when you're doing subsequent versions of these projects. So this is printing items on one line .py. There's only one version of this project. Okay, so let's go look at what the document says. Okay, so there's part A and part B, and what this is all about. Let me first demonstrate what this is all about. Normally, if you have a list and you do your typical print item, okay, so you'll get these numbers in a column. Okay, and the idea is to rather than have them show up in a column, it's to have them show up in a row like this. So we're going to be talking about how to do that. All right, so we're not going to be using that list. Okay, so we're going to be doing part A, which is to take this list and print it out, print red, green, and blue on a single line. Okay, so colors, equals red, green, and blue. And normally, if we were to just print this the way we normally do, for color and colors, we do print color. So if we run this, you get the thing you're familiar with, one color per line. But we want them all on one line. So to do that, you add a second argument here, and equals, and a space. This is not a blank string, this is a string with a space in it. Okay? And so if we run that, okay, so we get them all in one line now. Okay, there's a little complication we need to address here. Imagine you have another message here at the end that says all done. It turns out that message ends up, you continue on the same line. So you want to actually, and the intention is to have this message down here. So there's kind of a hack, as it were. You add a print statement that's with an empty argument list. That simply, the purpose of that is to move to the next line. Okay, that's what that print statement will do. So, but then when you print this message, it'll be printed on the next line. Okay, so voila, it's on the next line. All right, so now we're done with part A. We're going to do part B. The first thing we do is we comment this out. Okay, so this code is now disabled. Your multi-part projects should have all your code disabled except for the last part. So now we're going to do part B, which involves somewhat. It's kind of a somewhat more complicated problem, which is we have got a couple of pets that we put on a list, and now we want the information for each pet to be on one line, but each pet gets its own line. Okay, so it's going to build this up kind of gradually here. We have Fluffy. All right, name is Fluffy. It's a cat. It's white. And Woofy, who is a dog. Well, let me create my empty strings first. And the dog is Woofy. Type dog, or species dog. And the dog is brown. Then we're going to create a list named pets that has these two animals on it. Okay. And now we want to print out the information for each pet, where the information's up all in one line, but each pet's on its own line. So you could do for pet in pets. Oops. Print pet. And sure enough, if you run this, you'll see that you kind of do get things the way, kind of close to the way we want them. The problem is it's got like all the Python stuff, the quotes, the square brackets, and the commas. We don't want that. What we want is the text printed without that other stuff. So we need to print out the pet information in a different manner. Okay, so we're going to replace this line with something that we know does print a list on one line, which is this code. So I'm going to borrow that code. I'm going to uncomment it, tab it in. Okay, we don't need this line anymore. I'm just going to comment this out for now. Okay, and we need to change this, change the variables. Okay, so rather than printing out the entire list sort of using the statement, it's going to print out the list using this code. It's going to go through. Remember that each one of these guys is a list. So this is going to our pets list and getting one item at a time. Well, each item is a list itself. So pet is a list. So pet is a list. So we're going to go through the items in pet and print them out on one line. And then we need to move to the next line for our next pet. Okay. So if we run that, we get the output the way we expect. Okay. So now we're done with that. We've run it. We've verified that it works correctly. So now we're going to comment out this code. Right, so now we're ready for part C. Now part C is actually pretty much the same exercise in disguise. We have a list that has a bunch of lists on it. It's a tic-tac-toe board. Okay. So, and rather than creating the list by first creating the rows as they were with separate variables, we're just going to create this list in one statement by putting the list, the lists that represent each row inside this list. Okay, so in this fashion. So I'm going to actually borrow that code. Uncomment it, change the variable names, and we should be change the data. We need to change the data here. These two lists need to be replaced by lists that contain the row data of our tic-tac-toe board. Okay, so let's line these guys up nicely, and I'll put the X's and O's in a moment. And now we're going to go through the rows on the board, and instead of printing, see, notice each row is going to be, well, actually let me put the X's and O's in here. So what are they supposed to be here? XOX, and okay. This is kind of a technique I use to minimize typing here. So this is going to be X O, and then I think OXX. X. Not that it really matters. Okay, so here we have our board, which is a list with 3 items, and the 3 items happen to be lists. Okay, so now we're going to go through the items in board, which are rows. Okay, and for each row, which is a list, we're going to actually look at the, I'm going to call it the symbol X or O. Okay, and we'll print the symbol. So all we really did was change variable names. Notice we didn't change the structure of the program. So it's really the same program. So it's just a matter of changing variables and changing the data in the variables. And now let's run this. and voila, it does. Well, all right, there's no example of what it should look like, but we do get our tic-tac-toe board printed the way we want it. All right, so at this point, your code for this project is complete. Okay, leave this enabled so I can run it without having to make any changes to your code. Okay, attach this to an email. Start a new email, attach this, and in the subject line, instead of shopping list, now you're gonna your subject line will be printing items on one line. Okay, then you attach your printing items on one line.py file. Okay, and you don't have to put anything in the body unless you want to ask some questions or something like that. Alrighty, so that's how to do projects. Once again, let me review this. So you'll draft your code. It's due Friday by 11:59 p.m. Email it to me. Wait for a feedback email. If you get feedback, read it carefully and make the required changes. And then email your revised code. If you get a message that says it looks good, feel free to submit it, and you're done. Okay? So, and if you're not done, we keep going around and around and around until finally you get this message. Okay? And hopefully, at most you get, have one round of feedback. Actually, the ideal thing is to have no rounds of feedback, just have this message to say go ahead and submit. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions. Okay, good luck and have fun.